Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the CRM MVP podcast. Thank you so much, everyone, for all the messages regarding the last episode, episode number 80. I was a little concerned, obviously, that I was going to be rambling all over the place, talking about a bunch of different things, but it was really an episode to celebrate, once again, the 3 years of the podcast and also to talk about, some things that I noticed that have changed over the last 3 years. But the one thing that I've noticed that has changed over the last few weeks actually is the fact that a lot of things are kind of getting back to normal. And I guess it all depends on when you're listening to this episode. If you're listening to this years from now, maybe this will just be a memory, in the past. But obviously, the world is going through a pandemic right now related to the coronavirus, and it seems that things are getting back to normal. I'm a member of a few organizations, and I'm a volunteer of some other organizations that have been perhaps closed to the public or closed to, the activities that they performed in the past. And I keep getting these emails about, we're getting ready to reopen. We're going to open in 2 weeks. We're opening in 1 week, or things that are getting back to kind of normal, at least maybe in a limited fashion, but they're getting back to normal. And I think that Dynamics 365 went through kind of the same thing. I think there was a lot of uncertainty when it comes to partners and customers as well. I certainly noticed it with some of my customers. Some of them were kind of put on hold a little bit when it came to pursuing implementations and upgrades and things like that, where customers came back and said, look, right now, 100% of our attention and focus is on making sure that our employees can do their jobs from home. A lot of people had just horrible internet connections, or they didn't have the right equipment, or even moving their phone system to the home, right? Because they were using maybe a voice over IP system or something like that. It became complex for some organizations, and honestly, I don't blame them for saying, look, I know that we were going to start this project, or perhaps we started this project 3 weeks ago or whatever it was. But right now, priority number one is making sure that our operations don't stop, right? We need to support our customers. We need to continue to sell our products, whatever it is. And, they put that stuff on hold. And I assume it was the same for Dynamics 365 partners. They saw that, and anything that had to do with maybe hiring new employees and extending or expanding, teams within organizations and stuff like that was kind of put on hold, right? We need to make sure that other things that have a higher priority, perhaps maybe making, helping people get to work from home, which I think that for partners, that's probably an easier thing to make happen because they're a technology company. But I think that, in some cases, things took a backseat to stuff that is more important, right? Supporting customers, the customers that still wanted to implement, keeping the operations going and all of that. But like I said, things are getting back to normal. And I think that a lot of people that perhaps are looking for a career change. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Orlando, Florida, and he's on the hotel industry, let's say, related. He deals with large events and stuff like that at this massive hotel and conference center in Orlando. He's one of the managers there, and obviously he saw the business kind of die overnight, essentially, because anyone who was planning to host a large conference or large event in Orlando canceled, and no one else is booking anything when it comes to large events like that. He reached out to me because we kind of went to college together. He went to a different college, but we both graduated the same high school. And, we went to different colleges, but to study the same thing, computer engineering. So we have kind of the same background, but he landed this job while he was in college. And, as a manager, he's making good money. So he's sort of like, if I go back and start from zero doing computer stuff or IT stuff, which is what I went to school for, I'm probably going to take a pay cut from what I'm doing right now. So, but now, obviously, you're kind of forced to take that pay cut because there's no business. So he reached out to me and said, what is it that you're working with? What is it that I can focus on? I want to get into that industry. And, obviously, after having a conversation with him, I feel that he is a better suit for the functional side of implementing dynamics just because of his background and because of when I think about a functional consultant or a functional resource, the skills that are needed to do that job is something that I think he can pick up pretty easily or pretty quickly, at least compared with people that don't have that IT background. And I think that it would be maybe harder for him to pick up things like development and stuff like that. And that's because he is, he hasn't done any development since he went to college, and we both graduated back in 2003. So it's been a long time. When I started thinking about partners getting back to normal, when I started thinking about, my friend who's not in the industry trying to make it into the industry, I started thinking about, well, if I was hiring functional resources right now, what are the 10 things that I would like a functional consultant to know before they can be called or hired as a functional consultant? Now, I'm talking about someone who's a full-on functional consultant, right? You can start your career as a junior consultant that doesn't know maybe almost anything and kind of learn as you go. But these are the 10 things that I think if you're going to be a functional consultant, there are 10 things you need to know for sure, and these are them. So I wanted to put a list together of the 10 things every functional consultant should know and, kind of just put it out there because this is just my opinion on the 10 things that I feel that if I was interviewing a functional consultant and this is a checklist or something like a form where you're applying for a job, and if you check yes on all these 10 things, you get a job. Like, you have what it takes to be a functional consultant or a functional resource, in my opinion. Now, what I want from this is I want debate. I want to hear what you guys think about my list. I want to hear what you think should have make it to the list, and perhaps what things should I remove from the list. Maybe you look at number 5 and you're like, that's ridiculous, that's not important. I think this, which is not on the list, is more important than number 5 or whatever it is. But when I think about the projects that I work on, when I think about the resources that I need help with, these are the things that I need you to know. If you're going to work for Elevate Solutions, or if you're going to work for, if you're going to work in a project that I'm going to be leading, or I want to be a solution architect for, and someone says, here's a functional consultant, these are the 10 things I want you to know for my project. The other stuff we can work around. And I realized that, there's a lot more to it, to being a functional consultant, than the 10 things on my list. I'm not discounting other things, but at the same time, I feel that these are the 10 most important things that I could think of. And perhaps, again, I hear a feedback and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's true. That is more important. But these are the things that I thought about when I wrote the list. So let's get started with the 10 things every functional consultant should know, according to, I guess, Gus Gonzalez. So number 1 on the list is obviously extending CDS, or the Common Data Service, and I'm talking about adding fields, adding custom entities, and obviously everything that comes with that. If you're adding fields, you need to know field types, you need to know roll-up fields, you need to know calculated fields, you need to know formatting, you need to know, everything there is to know about adding fields. Auto number fields, you need to know, what's the primary field on an entity. You need to know requirement levels. What do you need to do to, enable field level security, and perhaps, what that is, at least understand it. And we'll talk about security later, so I'm not going to get into that. But when you're creating a field, I want you to know everything there is to know about creating fields. And I know there's a ton of information there, especially best practices that you kind of develop over time. But when it comes to creating fields, I don't want a functional consultant to not know how to add an option set, for example, or not know how to set minimum and maximum values in a currency field. Like, there are things in there that are not debatable. When it comes to adding fields to CDS, you should know everything there is to know about it. Now, I get it. There are things that are complex, like there are some complex things you can do with calculated fields that not even I know. I get that. I haven't tested calculated fields and roll-up fields to the maximum of the abilities of what the functionalities can do. I get that. There might be some weird situations where you may not know how to accomplish that with a specific field, like maybe special formatting within auto numbers that you don't really understand. You have to go custom and I get it. You don't need to know that. That's not part of the 100% that I'm talking about. But you need to know, all the different field types. You need to know what they do. If you look at a field called customer field and you don't know what that is, that's unacceptable to me. Like, you can be a junior consultant and not know what that is. I get that. But a functional consultant needs to know every single field type, needs to know what can you do with them, and needs to know what to do to not get in trouble. Like, for example, don't use local option sets. Like, for example, try to avoid whole number fields. Things like that. And I've talked about some of these best practices in previous episodes. I don't want to talk too much about, that specific thing. Best practices within fields. I feel like I can do a whole episode just talking about my best practices when it comes to adding fields and the reasons why. But, I'll leave that up to you if you want to hear that. I think that it might be boring for anyone who's not a solution architect or functional consultant listening to this. Jonas might run into another tree. I don't know if you saw that he ran into a tree listening to the podcast. So thank you, Jonas, for tuning in, and try not to run into any more trees. But the same thing that I was talking about when it comes to fields, I expect it from custom entities. You need to know what custom entities are used for. You need to know the difference between ownership levels. What is a user or team-owned entity versus an activity entity versus an organization-owned entity? I put out a tweet a few weeks ago when I said that organization-owned entities are useless pretty much, and I never use them at all. And I got a lot of backlash about that, and I learned some stuff from the community about it. Felt pretty strong about the fact that organization entities are useful. And I think the only person that had kind of an argument about it was Van Balmer, who pointed out that virtual entities are organization owned and are useful. That is true. Virtual entities are useful and they are organization owned, but you don't really get a choice when it comes to a virtual entity. It's not like I can choose to make it user or team owned versus organization. It's kind of by default, just like user or team owned will always be an activity entity. You cannot have an activity entity owned by the organization. So again, I don't know if that is a rebuttal to my best practice, which is never to use organization entities, but that is a good point. Virtual entities are very useful. And when it comes to custom entities, from what I expect from a functional consultant is you need to know all about entities, but not really virtual entities, now that we're talking about that. And I don't think you need to know everything there is to know about virtual entities and how to establish connectors and how to set that whole thing up. I think that a technical consultant or a technical architect should be responsible for that. I don't think this is something a functional consultant should do. So virtual entity will be like the asterisk, the caveat to your skills when it comes to functional consultant. But if I tell you to create, a custom entity that should be a child of the account entity or something like that, you need to know how to do that. And you need to know that it needs to be user or team owned, what's the name, and you need to know that you establish a connection by simply creating a lookup. If it's a child of the account entity, you create a lookup to account and boom, a one-to-many relationship is created from the account to this custom entity, and now they're connected. And kind of it's a referential relationship. It's not really a parent-child, but you get the point. It's a one-to-many relationship at that point. So extending CDS, very, very important, is number one on the list. I would say is the most important one of the list, even though the other 9 are not really in any order. Number 2 is not more important than number 3 or whatever. I think number 1 is number 1, though. Number 1 is you need to know how to customize CDS. If you don't know how to do that, like to a high degree, you cannot be a functional consultant. At least not in my team. Number 2 is customizing forms. And I'm talking about everything within the forms, adding and removing fields from the form. Also, obviously, the field properties like remove visibility or locking the field in the system or, showing the label with a line underneath, or showing the label above it by modifying the formatting, changing how many I guess pixels or whatever it is are added to, or are, how do you call it, reserved for the label versus the actual field. Like all of those little conditions about a field, in formatting as well, you should know all of those. Like, for example, how do you make a checkbox, right? The fact that it's a 2-option field, and then once you add it to the form, modify the format to display as a checkbox rather than a yes or no toggling field, right? So all of those things you need to know how to do. You need to know how to add and remove sections. You need to know how to add and remove tabs as well. And what is the, what happens when you add tabs and when you add sections in there. And when you add a section, into a form, you need to know how to add lists to those sections. You need to know how to add quick view forms into those sections as well. And when you add a list, be able to change the display from displaying as a list to displaying as a chart if you really need to. All of those, to me, are basic things that you should know when it comes to modifying forms. There are some complex things when it comes to customizing forms. For example, adding, like timeout, clocks, and adding the customer insights, control and things like that. Like there are things like that, like navigation links and whatnot, iframes. I don't expect you to know how to add an iframe into the system and kind of configure the iframe itself. I think that a technical architect should do that, or a technical consultant should do that. You don't need to get that far, but anything that really doesn't require code or complexity like that, you should know how to do that. There are things, when it comes to adding fields in particular to the form, that maybe you don't need to know. Like it wouldn't be a big deal. Like if you don't know how to do cascading lookups, I think that's an experience thing that you learn over time. Is a little bit of an advanced skill. I think the most functional consultants might not even know how to do that. I get it. That is something you learn over time. And by the way, now that I think about it, I should probably do cascading lookups for 2 Minute Tuesday. So I'll write that down and make it happen. But if I give you a screenshot or a list and say, here are the fields and sections and tabs that I need in a form, you should totally be able to do that. I fully expect a functional consultant to be able to do that. Now, again, I'm just talking about knowing how to do it, not why. I think that is where the solution architect comes in. I don't expect a functional consultant to know exactly how to customize the form to create the best user experience or anything like that. I don't expect that functional consultant to do that. If they do, that's awesome. Like, architect level skills on a consultant are always welcome and great. And I'd love to get feedback and kind of like, hey, you think we should do it this way versus that way? Totally, absolutely, 100% encouraged. But if you don't have it, I wouldn't deduct any points or whatever it is from you. And by the way, I thought about like and this might be something that, I do in the future, or that maybe we should do this as a community project. But I feel that there could be a functional consultant kind of job questionnaire or something like that, where every one of the 10 things on the list, and assuming, again, I'm just using my list, but let's say as a community we come up with the top 10 things that a functional consultant should be able to do, give it a point, like between 1 and 5. And those things are like, what can you do with it? So let's pick customized forms, for example. So we pick customized forms and we say, look, if you know how to add iframes and whatever you think is the most complex thing in forms, you get 5 points. And if you know how to add, do these things, you get 4 points. If you know just how to add fields, then 3. And obviously if you don't know how to customize forms, you get 1 point. So if we do that, if we come up with some kind of grade scale for all 10 things on my list, or the list that we end up with, that's 50 potential points, right? 5 points per item is 50. And then we say something like, look, if you can take this questionnaire and demonstrate your skills, not only just check the boxes, but actually show us that you know how to do it, and you get 35 points, let's just say, or more, then you would get a job as a functional consultant pretty much anywhere. And I feel that that's something we could do, like universally. Like if you can take these 10 things and after you grade yourself, you have more than 35 points, which means you have more than medium level. You should be able to get a job as a functional consultant pretty much anywhere, because I think that some of these, you may have a 1, but you may kill in 8 of the 10, with 5s. So I think that you would still be able to get a job. You can always improve one of them or whatnot. So I think that can be possible, to create that kind of evaluation and post it out there for partners to use. To be honest, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So I don't know, maybe a future project, maybe something we do in 2021. I don't know. I have kind of goals for this year, but if anyone wants to take me up on the offer, I'm happy to help and see if we can come up with something. And to be honest, like if that works, you could do it for a developer, you could do it for a solution architect, whatever it is. 10 things, 5 points each, potential scores, and then you take the test. If you score more than 35 or 40 or whatever, like some partners may be like, no, you have to be 45 or higher, and if not, you don't make it. Okay, that's fine. That's you. And some other partners might be like, you get 15 points, you're good to go. All right, cool. They can adjust however they see fit. All right, cool. Let's move on with number 3 on the list. Number 3 on the list is working with and understanding solutions. And I'm talking about Power Platform solutions and Dynamics 365 solutions. More and more operations are moving to the Power Platform, or the Power App Maker, if you will, and creating solutions there that can include not only your Dynamics 365 or CDS functionality and customizations, but also your flows and Canvas apps and whatever other Power Platform things that are part of your solution. So understanding those solutions, which is, by the way, the same thing. So unmanaged, managed, that stuff is pretty much the same when it comes to Power Platform solutions and when it comes to Dynamics 365 solutions. So understanding solutions and kind of how they work is important. And also more important is working with them, like understanding that you have to go to a specific solution and add the functionality there so that solution can be moved from one environment to another, whether that is dev to test or test to production, whatever it is, like understanding that part of it. Now, you don't have to make the decisions. You don't have to be the one saying, okay, here's the solution we're going to work with, and here's how we're going to implement it, and we're going to move it every weekend. No, you don't have to know, life cycle management. That is part of what the solution architect should do. But once that decision is made, and by the way, in a lot of cases, it's not really made by the solution architect. It's a standard the partner follows or the architect follows or whatever it is. Once that standard is implemented, you need to know what that is, right? You can't just be customizing the default customizations and everything is just new _ whatever. Like, you need to know how to work with and understand solutions overall. So understanding that, even if you don't have to do it, if someone were to import a solution on top of this other one, it would override it. Like, you need to understand the moving parts, even if you don't get to design it yourself. So that is number 3 on the list. Number 4 is auditing. Auditing is one of those things that is going to come up early on every implementation. It should come up early in every implementation because auditing is not reactive, right? If you do something and you realize you want to go back and see who changed something or whatever it is, well, if auditing wasn't enabled, then you're going to miss it. So typically what happens is if there's a big data migration that is part of your project or whatever it is, once all the data is in the system and is pretty stable, you enable auditing, and now every change going forward, it's something that you capture. In some organizations, they want to enable audit before the data migration takes place. I personally, and again, this might be best practice or not, depending on where you work and what partner you work with. I personally, if we're pushing a bunch of data, let's get it into the system. We're going to capture who created and when because of created on, created by, all of that. And then we enable audit going forward. Any changes that are made, we capture that. Now, obviously, there's more to audit than that. And again, this is another one of those. It could be its own episode where you talk about what fields should you audit and, what entities should be auditable and, who makes those decisions and how do you review and deal with logs and all of that stuff. But you need to at least know how to enable it and manage it. So, for example, if someone says, look, that field shouldn't be audited, you need to know how to turn that off. or that entity should be audited, but is not. You need to know how to turn that on. And that might be part of going into the system settings to deal with that and enable those entities or that section of it. Or it could be customizations at the entity or field level, depending on what you're trying to do. So you need to know how to do that. Because remember, out of the box, pretty much when you create a field, auditing is already automatically on. Or when you create an entity, you have the auditing section that you can turn on. But if the auditing is not working at the system level, nothing is being captured. All you're saying is, if in the event auditing is enabled, go ahead and audit this entity too. But, just by clicking and enabling that when you're adding a new entity or a new field, it doesn't really do anything unless auditing is actually working. So you need to know that. Once again, this might be something that you could protest and say that a solution architect should be the one configuring this, or perhaps a technical architect should be the one configuring this. I think that a functional consultant should know auditing. It should know that not only data changes are auditable, but other things are auditable as well. Like if customization events are now auditable, and login attempts and stuff like that from users when they log in are auditable. We're now able to even capture things like reads and stuff like that based on some new things Microsoft did to improve the way auditing works. Even though the audit logs are kind of shown through Office 365, it doesn't really work exactly as the audit log in Dynamics works. But nonetheless, I think that a functional consultant should know how to enable and manage audit. So that's why it's number 4 on the list. All right, number 5 on the list is creating and managing charts. And I'm talking about the out-of-the-box charts in the system. Now, you, again, can say that, look, less and less we are seeing charts out of the box being used. We're using Power BI for everything. Well, I don't know. Are you? I think that there's a lot of debate still on which ones you should be using. I kind of proposed this question on an episode I did at the last MVP Summit, the one that we did last year, because, I think we had 2 episodes about this. We recorded one about this versus that, which I don't remember what episode number it was, but I remember recording it in Sweden, and we did this 10 situations that were achievable by 2 functionalities, and I asked the other MVPs, which one would you pick? So let's say, I think we talked about, let's say something is possible through workflows or flow. Which one would you pick? And one of the questions was, if you need to show something like, I don't know, customers that bought in the last 30 days, whatever it is, you need to show some kind of business intelligence report situation. And it's possible to do it with charts out of the box and with Power BI. So you can do it with both. Which one would you choose and why? And I think for the most part, if I remember correctly, most of us, except for Antti, I think, picked out of the box charts. They're easier to work with. They're in real time. There's a bunch of stuff. Now, obviously, there are situations where charts wouldn't work. You had 200,000 records or something like that. Power BI looks at 200,000 records and it laughs. Out of the box charts will just throw you an error saying you have too much data. We were talking specifically about situations where you can actually do it. You have 5,000 records or whatever, right? If you want to display the information in a chart, will you use out-of-the-box charts or Power BI charts? So I asked the MVPs, and again, for the vast majority, I think most of us said out-of-the-box Dynamics 365 charts to that. Then I asked the same question during the MVP Summit last year, and Ulrich was there, the CRM chart guy was there, and he agreed that he used the out-of-the-box chart rather than the Power BI chart, if it's something that is possible with both. I don't know if that's his position today. That's still my position today. I haven't changed my mind yet. I think that out-of-the-box charts are super convenient. I can embed them everywhere. They work pretty much seamless. When it comes to Power BI, at least right now, if it's not a personal chart or a personal tile of some kind that you can embed into a personal dashboard, it starts to get tricky to show some of that. And I know that it's going to become easier. I know that it's already easier when it comes to Canvas apps and other situations, but it's not as easy as a chart, as an out-of-the-box Dynamics 365 chart. So because of that, I think creating and managing charts is an important skill to have as a functional consultant. And if we're doing our whole 5-point scale grading system, 5 on the other side would be messing with the XML, changing the way the chart works out of the box, outside of what's possible with Dynamics 365. Whether it is using the XRM toolbox and the chart editor to modify the way it works and labels and things like that, or whether it is straight up exporting the chart, modifying the XML, importing it back in. If you can do more than what Dynamics 365 does out of the box, maybe not know every single option, but if you can do a lot more, then you get a 5 on that one. And I would say 3 is how to create charts from scratch and deal with the different lines and aggregations and stuff like that. If you know how to use charts out of the box pretty good, then you're good to go. You get a 3 on that. And 1 would be, I don't really know how to work with charts, right? So create and manage charts out of the box. And I think on the same path of creating and managing charts, I'm going to go with number 6, creating and managing dashboards. I mean, if we're going to sit here and agree that using the out-of-the-box charts is, in some cases, more valuable than knowing how to use Power BI charts, the same will apply to out-of-the-box dashboards versus Power BI dashboards. And I know that Power BI dashboards has a lot more capabilities and functionalities that Dynamics 365 dashboards. I get that 100%. I agree with you. There's a lot more you can do with Power BI, but I don't think a functional consultant should know that. If you know it, that's awesome, but I'm not going to deduct any points because you're not a Power BI dashboard expert, or that you know how to create them from scratch and do everything that there is to know to do about dashboards with Power BI. And the reason why the out-of-the-box dashboard makes it into the list and not Power BI dashboards is because I think that a functional consultant can know everything that's possible to be done with an out-of-the-box dashboard, whereas expecting that a functional consultant know everything that can be done with a Power BI dashboard is not, I don't think is right. I don't think that realistically you should expect a functional consultant to know everything that's possible to be done with dashboards in Power BI. You just can't do that, at least in my opinion. So out-of-the-box dashboards, you should be able to create them, managing them, whether it is picking the security roles that have access to it, understand the difference between personal and system dashboards, understanding how many objects you can have, how to change the sizes, layouts, all of the different objects that you can add. And although you shouldn't know how to create web resources and iframes, for example, you should know how to pick them if they already exist and you can add them into a dashboard. You should know where to go to do that. You should be able to know everything you can do with dashboards in Dynamics 365, not with dashboards in Power BI. Again, we're making it easier. It feels like by the week to be able to consume Power BI dashboards and functionality inside of Dynamics 365 for model-driven apps. We're making it easier, but I think that, it's unrealistic to expect that a brand new functional consultant looking for a job at your company, it needs to know that. I think that's something that is a bonus for sure later on in the future. All right, number 7. Number 7 is creating and managing business rules. Business rules is another one of those that I think you can learn everything there is to know about business rules and be a functional consultant. I do think that when it comes to thinking about a solution and thinking about how 10 different business rules that you need will solve the problem that you're having or get you over the challenge that you're having or something like that, I think that is a task for a solution architect. I don't think a functional consultant needs to know that. I don't think a functional consultant needs to be able to come up with a solution like that. But if you as an architect, or if me as an architect, come up with a solution that says, here are the 10 business rules that will solve this problem, then you as a functional consultant need to know how to create them and need to know everything there is to know about business rules. Like, for example, scopes. What is the difference between the entity scope versus the all forms or versus the individual form scope? You need to know how to use all the different actions, right? Like hide and show visibility, modifying, requirement levels. What does the error thing do, right? Or recommendations too. Things like that. So all of those different actions that you can perform in a field, you should be able to know those things to 100%. You should be able to create conditions and know how to create conditions that have more than one requirement. Like if this field contains data and that field contains data and that field equals 5, then you do X, right? You should be able to do those things. Have multi-level decision making with check conditions and different actions. That is very important. I think that a functional consultant should be able to do that. Number 8, creating and managing business process flows. Same thing that we talked about business rules. I think that when it comes to business process flows, you can learn pretty much everything that is possible with a business process flow. You can learn about branching. You can learn about executing workflows that are either global or upon entering or exiting a stage. You should know about how many steps and stages you can have within a business process flow. You can have up to 30 stages. You can have up to 30 steps per stage. You can also span up to 5 entities. And in order to get into those entities have to be enabled to use business process flows, which, by the way, is a setting that cannot be turned off after you turn it on. You should know all those things as a functional consultant. And on top of that, you need to know how many business process flows you can have per entity. You need to know how you can essentially filter who has access to a business process flow based on their security role. You need to know all of that stuff. You need to know how it actually works. So when you are on stage number 3 and you've selected or you checked 3 different steps out of 10 or whatever it is, you need to know where that information goes. Like, how does Dynamics know that this particular record is on stage 3, step 4? Like, how do you know that? Right? So I think business process flow is another one of those that you can learn everything there is to know about business process flows, being a functional consultant. Now, once again, back to what we were just talking about with solution architecture, you don't need to be the one designing the solution. You don't need to be the one making the call that this thing that you just learned from this team, this process they follow, should be a business process flow rather than, I don't know, a custom entity in some flow or some workflows doing the work. Or maybe it is a Canvas app, better solved by a Canvas app, or better solved by, an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what the solution is. It's not up to you to design a solution. I do not expect a functional consultant to figure out that creating 1 or 2 business process flows is the right answer for this specific issue that the customer is having. I do not expect that at all. But I do expect it that if I figure out that a business process flow is the best way to solve something, I do expect a functional consultant to be able to create it from beginning to end. Whether it spans multiple entities, it has many stages, many steps, some steps are required or not, or there's branching involved. Like, branching can get pretty intricate, right? You're going through a process and it says if this happens, then you need to do these more steps and stages, and by the way, they need to be required or not. Like, branching can get pretty sketchy. Well, as a functional consultant, you should know that. If you struggle with it, that's fine. You can learn it over time, but you need to know that. If you are trying to look for a job as a functional consultant or a spot in a team as a functional consultant, and you have no idea how business process flows work or how you edit them or anything like that, well, that's a huge deduction on your potential score to become that functional consultant. So that is number 8 on the list. We're getting close to the end here. This episode is not going to be as long as usual. I know that you guys love it when I just talk for 2 hours, but this is just getting close to the end here. Number 9, and by the way, I realize that by now some of you are probably sweating the fact that the thing that you think is the most important thing a functional consultant should know hasn't been mentioned, We only have 2 to go, so you might be like, is this guy not really gonna say that portals? Or I don't know. Like, I don't know what you have in your head right now, but we're about to find out whether they your thing on the list made it or not. Number 9 is understanding and configuring Dynamics 365 security. Like, you have to know that inside out. Once again, not architect level. It's not up to you to design how many security roles you need, or how many business units you need, or what's the name of those roles. Doesn't matter. Like, that's not your job. But once a solution architect decides that, look, for this implementation, this number of users, this many locations, whatever it is, we need 8 security rules, and here's how I want them set up. You need to know how to do that. And you need to know what a business unit is. You need to know what hierarchy security is. You need to know what teams are, right? Owner and access teams. And you need to obviously know security roles. Now, do you need to know every single setting inside a security role? Absolutely not. I don't think I know them all either. I don't think anyone knows them all, right? So there's a bunch of little obscure settings in there that no one touches because no one knows what they are. And some of them might not be connected to anything, but I'm afraid to turn it on or off. I wouldn't even know how to test it. So do you need to know every single setting in there? No. But you need to know scopes, right? So whether it is the user level, or non-user level business unit, parent-child business unit, organization scope, when it comes to applying your security permissions, you need to know all the different actions that can be done, such as create, read, write, delete, append to, assign, share, all those things. You need to know what they do. And you need to know how they talk to each other too, how they communicate. So, what is the relationship between account and contact? Who is the append? Who's the append to? All of that stuff you need to understand. I think that it is not unrealistic to expect that you know best practices as well. That you know that leaving delete permissions is not the best practice. You want to remove that. And perhaps best practices should be that number 5 on the scale, right? When I'm evaluating understanding security, right? If you can name all of these best practices in our, imaginary functional consultant score or test, you get 5 points. But understanding those things is very important. Understanding the best practice, knowing that the custom entities get added to the custom entities tab all the way to the end. Understanding that the customization, entity is not something that you want to mess with a whole lot. When it comes to regular users, for example, understanding how a user can have multiple security roles and what are the repercussions of having multiple security roles, how all of those security roles work with each other. What happens if the user has one security role, but he or she is member of a team that has a completely different one? What are the results of that? So understanding all of those things is very important for a functional consultant. The same thing with business units, right? Understanding what are business units, who's a member of it, how are they connected with each other, what's a child business unit, what's a root business unit, all of that is important as well. And obviously there are some, kind of side functionality, like if you know about access teams, you're going to know about access team templates. If you know about field level security, you need to know about field security profiles. So there are things that are kind of connected to it, but all related to security. Now, security is pretty broad when it comes to Dynamics. And that is another episode on the list that I need to get to, which is talking about everything else that has to do with security. When it comes to security, you're talking about authentication and authorization. I'm talking about the authorization part for number 9. Authorization is security roles, business units, teams, that kind of thing. But we still have the authentication piece that we've never talked about in this show, by the way. Over 3 years now, we've never really talked about authentication and how do you integrate with your own local domain controller, and what are the advantages of using Azure Active Directory versus your own local Active Directory, pros and cons. Which one should you do? What about multi-factor authentication? Is there a better multi-factor authentication over others? What if you use third parties like RSA tokens and things like that versus just the regular Azure MFA or multi-factor authentication? Again, that could be an episode all on its own. Maybe I need to invite Chris Cognetta or someone to, help me kind of deliver all of the complexity there. But security is pretty big. We can get into IP zoning, and it can get pretty interesting, and I've seen it, in action before, where I've worked with customers and I'm traveling because I'm teaching or I'm speaking at a conference or on vacation. It happened to me on vacation too. I was in Jamaica once, and a customer said, hey, we're trying to log in and we're having these issues, or some functionality was missing, I don't remember. And I tried to log in just to help them out when I'm on vacation. I know I like to jump in and solve a problem if I can. And I was zoned out, right? It was this, complete IP fence around the U.S. and Canada. And I was in Jamaica and couldn't log in. I had to call them and say, can you add Jamaica to the list? They were like, really? You're working on vacation? You shouldn't do it. Well, anyway, I did it. They added to the list and I was good to go. All of that stuff, it's outside of what I expect a functional consultant to know. The authentication piece is something that I don't expect a functional consultant to know. But the authorization piece, you need to know very, very well. Not to architect level, as I mentioned, but for sure how things work and how you can make them happen. And then we go to the last one, number 10. And once again, if you're waiting for one of them to be mentioned and I haven't mentioned it, I don't know if this is it, but if it's not, I for sure want to hear what you have to say so we can come up with the best possible list. But number 10 for me is you need to have a basic understanding of the first-party apps, the Microsoft Dynamics 365 first-party apps. Like, I get it. There are some partners out there that do not work with the first-party apps anymore. Like, they're all about model-driven apps. They create from scratch, never use any of the Microsoft stuff. But I think as a functional consultant, for most partners today, at least, you are going to be customizing the first-party applications. For most partners. Probably not all projects either, but a lot of partners will be still working starting from the sales app and customizing, or the customer service app and customizing, or the field service app and customizing, whatever it is. So you have to have a basic understanding of those apps. Now, do you need to know everything that is possible within the product catalog of the sales app? No, you don't need to know everything that's possible there, but you need to know about the product catalog, and you need to know kind of the things that you do with it, right? The fact that you can have products in there and discount lists and price lists and units and unit groups and that kind of thing. You need to know the moving parts. Do you need to know everything about, entitlements and SLAs and the knowledge-based articles or the knowledge base within the customer service app? No, you don't need to know about the fact that you can have articles in multiple languages and have expiration dates and stuff like that. You don't need to know all those details. I think that if you were going to specialize on one of the apps, like if you were going to be a field service functional consultant, then yes, you need to know the intricate level of detail. The basic understanding of the first-party app no longer applies to you. Now you have to have a deep understanding of the whatever app you decide to be an expert on. I get that. You need to be an expert on that. But if you're going to be an overall functional consultant of Dynamics, you need to know basic information about the first-party apps. And by the way, that's not hard to gain either. There's a ton of videos about the first-party apps. You can get trials of them for 30 days and just play with them, work with them, see what you can create. Like, you can learn that stuff pretty easy, even if you don't work with it in an ongoing basis. But if I'm going to hire a functional consultant right now in 2020, and they have never seen the sales app, they've never seen the customer service app or the field service app, you can't be a functional consultant. Not at my company, at least. Now, maybe at another company where they do not touch first-party apps at all, maybe they will give you a chance, but at least for me, it's part of my list. Again, this might be the one that is the most debated amongst everyone listening to this episode, whether a functional consultant should have knowledge of the first-party apps or not. Let me know what you think on the comments below. If you're at crmmvppodcast.com, you can always leave comments there. You can also obviously send me emails or tweets or whatever, or info@crmmvppodcast.com. But I want to hear from you. What do you think about my list? And by the way, there's a bunch of other valuable skills that I consider but didn't make it to the list. Would I love my my functional consultants to know everything about the different clients for Dynamics 365, everything that's possible with the mobile clients, the phone and the tablet app, everything that's possible with the Outlook or the app for Outlook, rather, or the Outlook clients, if you're counting the client, the full-on client for Outlook? Would I love my functional consultants to know everything about portals? That, right? Be a portal expert, or at least know how portals are used, how companies are using it, and all of that. Would I love? Of course, I would love for them to be able to know all that stuff, but it's not a deal breaker. If you're not an expert on the mobile clients, that's okay. Like the functionality you're going to implement, especially if you think about the list, right? Adding fields, modifying security, dealing with audits and charts and that, like all that stuff, it's mainly geared to, the unified client, which works in every client pretty much. There are differences, we know that, because of form factors and whatnot. But for the most part, if you add a field in a form and you do it right, it's going to be fine everywhere, right? For the most part. Not every situation, but for the most part. Again, that's a valuable skill that is not part of my top 10. Another one, importing data. Would I love for you to know how to import data, how to, massage the data in a way that the import data wizard, or maybe you are a SSIS expert and you can use tools like Kingsway Soft to import. Like, I would love to do that. But if you don't know that, it's not a deal breaker either. You don't know how to import data? No problem. You can still be a functional consultant and know how to import data. For the most part, this is done by a technical consultant or someone else anyway. But if you knew how to do it, that's definitely brownie points. That's definitely a good feather in the cap for sure. If you are a functional consultant, duplicate detection. If you know how duplicate detection works, how to run jobs, how to create rules, that stuff is very important, but not a deal breaker. Workflows. I love workflows. If you listen to the show, they're like one of my favorite features of all of Dynamics. And one of the things that I enjoy the most, by the way, if I have a whole day where I'm like, oh man, I have to create 100 workflows, I don't say it like that. I say it like, this is awesome. I'm going to spend all day creating workflows. It's kind of weird and freaky, but I love to do it. I love to work with workflows. It didn't make the list. Why? Because workflows are humongous. It is impossible to grade someone on their knowledge of workflows. I mean, I consider myself to have an advanced knowledge of workflows, but I know I don't know everything that's possible with workflows. It's impossible, especially once you start adding all of the different third-party steps that are out there and solutions that are, like, every time I think I'm getting a hold of it, someone like Aiden Cascella will come up with some solution, some MVP or something will come up with a solution that will add, 50 new steps that I don't even know what they do. So workflows, and by the same token, flow is one of those things that I will love for functional consultants to know and be experts or proficient at least with them, but they're not deal breakers. You come to apply for a job as a functional consultant and you nail the first 10 on the list and you tell me that, I haven't really played with flow, I want to learn more. You got a job. Like, I'm not going to take points away from, you because you don't know flow or even workflows. It will be great and you're going to learn it. And, hopefully by the time you become really good at it, you'll be ready to move on to solution architect for sure. Same thing with Power BI. And we were talking about that before. Would I love for someone to know everything that's possible with Power BI charts or dashboards or reports? Yes, but I don't expect that. It's unrealistic to expect that a functional consultant knows this stuff. Model-driven applications, the same thing. Working with apps, changing the sitemap, adding, functionality or, customizations in there, controlling who can access them and stuff like that. I think an architect should deal with that because there's a lot more to it. There is the user experience part of it. There is the redirection part of it and the training and all of that. I don't think a functional consultant, it's required to. If you know how to do it, that's awesome. That's extra points. But I don't expect, it's not a deal breaker for me. If you're interviewing for a job and you say, I haven't really looked into apps and model-driven apps, a whole lot. I'll be like, that's fine. Yeah, I can teach you that. Same thing with Power Platform environments. Yes, it is important that you're working in dev or in the sandbox versus production and whatnot, but you don't need to know everything about it. Like, especially when it comes to designing how many environments you need, right? For this particular customer or company. Do you need 3 environments, 4 environments, 5 environments? Do you need to only move unmanaged or managed solutions into this environment or another? Who's the minimal copy? What's the, you don't need to know those things. It will be a big plus if you do, but you don't need to know it as long as you can identify on the maker that you're working on the right environment and on the right solution as well, which was part of the list, and then you can proceed to do your job. That's fine. And then finally, admin tasks such as backups and updates and dealing with storage and, licensing and stuff like that, resetting passwords. Like, I think that if you're in a project, there will be an admin in place to be able to do stuff like that. You don't need to know that. If I'm interviewing you for a job as a functional consultant and I ask you if you know how to, do an on-demand backup or something like that, or how do you, look to see if the last update was applied and you don't know how to do that, that's okay too. It's not a deal breaker. So again, there's a bunch of valuable skills. They are valuable. I'm not saying they're not, but they're not deal breakers in my opinion. Maybe you think otherwise. And like I said, I would love to learn from you and hear from you what you think should have made it to the list, what you think shouldn't have not made it to the list, and why you disagree or agree with the items on the list. So once again, feel free to reach out to us, info@crmmvppodcast.com, and follow us, or follow me on Twitter at Gus Gonzalez 2 for any comments or anything like that. LinkedIn, whatever it is, I'm always here for you. And let me know if you have any suggestions for future episodes. I'm glad to see that everyone is getting back to normal. Love to see the progress, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with another exciting episode. See you then.